Elliott has not been a good performance from the Cowboys' run defense. It's one of the lowest graded units that we have in the NFL so far this season. I was talking about this with Dalton Wasserman on the PFF review show when we were reviewing this game, and just some statistics for everybody and how bad the Cowboys have been in run defense. I actually tried to give them the benefit of the doubt and was like, okay, well, is it just, when they stack lighter boxes, did they not really have the guys to be able to really hold up? But the Cowboys in run defense plays when they have 7 or more defenders in the box, heavy boxes, 33.4 run defense grade, last in the NFL, 15 missed tackles, 29th in the NFL, average depth of tackle, which is a stat that we have that we like to point to, which shows how often you guys are how often they're bringing guys to the ground, 5.54. Ollie, they are letting running backs get more than halfway to a first down on 1st and 10. It's that bad in Dallas. So when you took a look at the film, what's going on here with the Dallas Cowboys? Is it simply that they don't have the horses to win the race, or is something schematically maybe that they could do a little bit better here as the season goes on?
Yeah, everything is just off, right? When you talk about run defense, you can get really complex with it, but the most basic tenets are talent, technique, tenacity. Really simple. Coaches write it on the whiteboard every single offseason. This is what we need. I think they lack all three. The interior of the defensive line just gets crushed one-on-one. They get moved on doubles all the time, and they've played 2 teams back-to-back who want to major in the run and specifically want to major in trying to get as many doubles as possible. If they can get 2 on the majority of plays, that's them in their happy plays. And they just have a group of interior guys who are getting blown off the ball. Mozzie Smith has not developed in any way they would have expected. The rest are older or cannot hold up at the point of attack. And then if you work your way back, that's when the more of the technique issues come in. They just can't fit properly. They get out-gapped consistently. Linebackers struggling all over the shop. Kendricks is the only one who shows signs of, I know where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
Then they use their safeties a lot to help them with the fit. You mentioned the heavy boxes. They fit with the safeties a ton. Those guys are all over the place. Linebackers all over the place, and they get caught in these binds of either guys are arriving to the wrong places. They are the worst group in the league right now at having 2 guys in one gap at any one time. Or the front of the defensive line gets displaced and pushed over another gap. So by the time those guys arrive, they think they're in the correct gap. They're all panicking and like, where should we go? All of a sudden there's daylight. All of a sudden Derrick Henry springing out the back door. All of a sudden all of the Saints are cracking them off the ball. It's just there's no other way to say it than an utter mess. And I don't know how you can completely correct it because, as you mentioned, they've gone heavier. They had these problems last year. They played a ton of dime. No one could fit the run. The film was awful at the end of the year. They just got away with it by some of the metrics. And then this season, they bring in Mike Zimmer. They tried to get heavier. He's played in base a ton, and they still can't fit, and they still don't have the talent up front.
Yeah, and I think that, when you watch this film for the Cowboys, you want to find answers for them, right? And you want to be like, okay, well, what can we do? Who can we move at different spots? Can we align guys a little bit differently? And maybe you can, right? You can, I suppose, just absolutely sell out to defend the run where you're almost playing a bear front where you've got just like multiple defensive linemen that are going to be on the field. But of course, then you're sacrificing things at the second level. You're sacrificing guys in coverage. In today's NFL, that's not really something that's conducive to success. So when you look up front, it's more of what you said, sort of the talent part of the triple T that you mentioned when it comes to run defense there. And the guys that they have up front, it's mainly the 4 main defensive tackles that they have played, specifically on the interior, because that's really where I want to focus. Now, DeMarcus Lawrence, who has also been a really good run defense player over the last couple of years, has struggled this year, just as the whole unit has struggled. So DeMarcus Lawrence taking a step back in run defense has absolutely hurt this team as well. But the 4 main defensive tackles that they have in the rotation, it is Osa Odigizua, it is Mozzie Smith, and then it's Linval Joseph and Jordan Phillips. Linval Joseph and Jordan Phillips are 2 guys who are new to the team in 2024. Both of those guys are above 30 years old. Jordan Phillips is 32. Linval Joseph is 35. And I don't think that those veterans, they're trying to get a ton out of those veterans, and it's just not working. I'm watching that Ravens film specifically, and I understand combo blocks are hard for anybody to handle, right? It's 2 guys versus 1. It's a simple math problem right there. And you would think because you are executing a combo block, you're supposed to get push. But Ollie, the push that these double teams, whether it was duo blocks or whether it was just a one of the combo blocks, for one of the defense tackles, they're getting them 3, 4, 5 yards off the ball every time. Like, these dudes just can't. There's no like truly holding the line of scrimmage. And I think Jordan Phillips has been a little bit slow to get off the ball and really get into these guys. I think the same has absolutely been true for Mozzie Smith, who has been, to me, a disappointment for this team, even as a second rounder, because the floor that Mozzie is giving you is way too low right now. I have his games pulled up in his career over the last 2 years. Now, including 3 from this year, he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games in which he has a run defense grade below 50. The floor is too low for this dude. And when you put him on the field, because you want his athletic ability to shine. That's why you draft him. But right now, he is not giving you enough in run defense. And I think that it's such an interesting thing to look back on. We focused so much about what the Cowboys didn't do in the run game, right? Oh, who's going to play running back for this team? They're ignoring the run game on the offensive side of the ball. They were also ignoring the run game on the defensive side of the football. And I think that is now becoming even more of a problem for them this year. So when you see the talent part of things, is there any sort of can play better, can play in a different spot, or is it just like, hey, they might just have to load the defensive line in order to be better in run defense at this point?
Yeah, there's really not a lot you can do talent-wise. What you could do, as you said, is, hey, let's get an extra body in there. We're going to try and reduce the front. We'll have 3 big guys cover up all the interior guys. You mentioned the Bear fronts. The Eagles had success with that this weekend. We can talk about that. But what you're just saying by doing that is, let's put one player we know has been bad on the field and take off someone who may help us out in other situations. We take Oven shown off the field or a linebacker to stick another defensive lineman down there. And so we're way worse in coverage, and our guys haven't been good in the hope that if they sit one-on-one, we have a chance. And to me, it's as bad as they've been getting blown off the ball. The big concern I have with them, and just kind of talent-wise, is just the lack of like sizzle off the snap. Like, they just don't move.
Yes.
And it's not a sit and read and react defense. They are supposed to be fitting fast. That is what they do. Everyone springs, linebackers crash, safety rolls down. It's not very complex. And so they're, one, not lined up correctly off the ball. They are regularly looking at each other, trying to figure out, what are we doing? When's the ball being snapped? Have had tons of issues with communication versus motion and all the stuff you're facing every week in the NFL now. And then the ball snaps, the first line doesn't move. They get rocked. The other guys are stood kind of slow playing their feet. Then they get rocked when someone doubles and climbs to them. And the only guy who has shown any kind of like real like juice and energy is DeMarcus Lawrence, who then has just played poorly. He's just getting pushed around, but he is at least fighting. He's the only one of those guys up front, I would say. Micah, plays in kind of a different role, different way than the interior guys do. But they've shifted ever so slightly every week. Lawrence inside more and more. We need help in here. Can you at least rock someone? Can you try and command part of the double team, right? Post snap, we'll spike you inside, command some of the double team, take some heat off one of the interior players so they can try and play one-on-one. And if you're both playing 1.5 each, that's how they tried to figure this thing out. And so Lawrence is throwing himself into it, giving you that effort, but still finds himself getting rolled back because now he's facing 1.5 of a double team. So just across the board, talent, technique, all the stuff we mentioned, it's just nowhere near good enough. I mean, even the Ravens, it was at times like they'd never faced an option type attack before, right? That they're reading Micah constantly. You read the best player. That's kind of like the most basic thing of option football. You take him out by freezing his feet, by reading him. Then behind him, those guys have no idea what they're supposed to be doing a lot of the time. They're trying to do these different things, these scrape exchanges we can get into if you want. They're trying to scrape it, and they end up every time with just 2 guys stood on the same vertical plane over the line of scrimmage, right? Lamar's first big run, busted scrape exchange, the touchdown, busted scrape exchange, Parsons overshown, stood in the same spots over and over again. So even if they weren't getting crushed inside, and don't get me wrong, they are getting crushed to like a bizarre degree. You mentioned some of the average depth of tackle numbers. It was 6.18 yards just against the Ravens. just against the Ravens. And in the fourth quarter, which people point to and say Marzi played a little better, there's some signs of life. They just took the option element out of the run game, the Ravens. They're like, we are not putting Lamar on a spot to get hurt. We think it's a blowout. They kind of whiffed on that, right? The Cowboys came back into it, but they took the option element out of the run game. So they simplified it for Dallas in the fourth quarter. When they were really cooking with their true offense, what they wanted to do, it was almost effortless.
So I do want to get into the scrape exchange stuff, because I think that when people listen to the show, they love to sort of get a little bit more into the weeds about it, about what that is. So when you say that Dallas was sort of trying to scrape exchange with Micah and everything, just go into a little bit of explaining what that is and why you do it, and why that's something the Cowboys have been trying to do, and then also, kind of how it has not worked for them yet.
Yeah, well, they didn't run it all that often. Again, you don't know the exact rules, so it's just based on the film, how people roll out. Maybe they have different rules. Obviously, I'm not in that meeting room,
Sure.
but essentially, a scrape exchange, you're facing like a read where you either give the ball or keep the ball as the quarterback. Most basic read option play, however you want to describe it, zone read type stuff. You scrape the exchange by taking the first line, the defensive line, the read man, the outside guy traditionally, he dives inside one gap, right? Usually you'd have the edge defender outside the width of the tackle. You have the linebacker inside the tackle, essentially. So you would normally, when you're plugging that, you would just plug one guy that goes outside the edge guy, right? The linebacker crashes inside of him. You try and scrape the exchange by moving the gaps post-snap. So the outside guy dives inside, the linebacker goes to the outside, takes the outside perimeter gap. So you just kind of try to muddy the read for the quarterback. When he gets the snap and he's reading, is it dive? Do I give it to the running back or do I keep it? He sees the edge defender dive inside and he's like, great, I'll keep it, right? Tries to rip out the back door. The linebacker rolls around and should be stood there. Quarterback runs into his lap. That's what you're trying to get to. Now, Lamar, two things. One is ludicrously fast. Him in space against a linebacker anyway is really difficult.
Right.
And secondly, to give some, kudos to the Cowboys linebackers, when you even watch the film, it's really hard to tell if he has the ball or not. He's the all-time best, give or not, quarterback, in my opinion, going back all the way to Louisville, right? It's just really hard to tell. He pulls it so late. He kind of rips it out rather than making a decision. It's just hard to see the thing, let alone at the speed it's all going at, all the bodies in front of you. Everyone's getting bench pressed off the line of scrimmage. You're trying to look through and go, oh God, who has the ball? So that all makes sense. What you can't have if you're scraping, right? It's pretty basic. You're trying to fill two gaps and just flip who has what assignment. You can never end up with two guys stood in the same gap. So someone either got the wrong call, didn't understand what they were doing, or people are panicking and freezing because they can't figure out what's going on.
Yeah. No, it's and obviously that it makes sense that you would sort of call that to defend Lamar, but like you said, it's easier said than done when you're trying to face Lamar and do something like that. Last thing I'll say about the Cowboys before we move on, I know that I feel like this is more a little bit stylistically than maybe like a whole defensive line, but what are your thoughts towards them being more of just like an attacking sort of front where, you mentioned like Mazi Smith or Linval Joseph or Jordan Phillips. It feels like when the ball is snapped, and I noticed this as well, when the ball is snapped, they're sort of hesitant. Like they're not exactly holding the ground exactly like the way that they need to. They know they're going to get pushed back a little bit. There's just not this thought to attack. And I know that, some defensive linemen say, okay, well, I watch this when I'm scouting guys. Normally it'll come from, okay, you get an undersized 3 technique guy, somebody who might be 290, 295 pounds, and their run defense grades might be higher in our system because they're getting in the backfield and they're making tackles, but they're doing so not really by holding the line of scrimmage, getting patient, being able to peek in the backfield and then rip the guy away to make the tackle. It's more of you're almost treating it like a pass rush. You're picking the gap, you're getting through the gap, and then you're sort of trying to meet the running back before he can make a move and get to the line of scrimmage. Is that a strategy that, now, again, I've only watched the Ravens game and a little bit of some of the games that I watched from them the last couple of weeks when it comes to run defense. So it's not like I've watched like all of last year to see if they maybe have tried this with Mazi Smith. But I think about Mazi Smith and how athletic he is, right? Is that, and even with the rest of the interior defensive line, something that they could all do together, or that maybe one of them could do individually? They could turn into a more attacking style and try that as a run defense strategy. Because right now it's very clear that them trying to hold the line of scrimmage
Yeah.
Well, they're not doing that at all whatsoever. So is that a strategy that is even worth exploring for this team?
It could be. The issue with this stuff is when you're trying to correct these things stylistically, you end up moving yourself into a more complex structure, right? Is you start having to do stunts and twists and quick penetration stuff and kind of moving gaps post snap. Well, now there's way more thought involved, particularly for the linebackers, trying to figure out and clean up who is where, what's my assignment. And if those guys are struggling playing straight up, the linebackers I'm talking about, the supporting safeties, why would you want to make their life more difficult? Why would you have confidence that they can pick and read that stuff on the fly? Kendricks may be able to do it, but the rest of the group, particularly the safeties coming down, is a complete mess at the moment. So it's tough to do. And they've tried this with Lawrence. It's basically, can we move him inside slightly and just have him go rip really quick so we can kind of clean the picture for the other guys? And that hasn't worked. So could you maybe flip flop some of those roles? You could certainly give it a try. At this point, it's like, what else are we going to do? We got to find something to figure this out. But you again find yourself in the bind of, okay, to try and get Marzi Smith to be effective for us in the run game, do we either increase the pressure on our linebackers, which we're not so sure about, just kind of in terms of thinking of reading the game out, or do we then have to say, well, DeMarcus can't play inside as a nose or a one, so we got to get someone else in there to then have Marzi in the spot we like, and so for some reason we've taken DeMarcus Lawrence off the field to put a bad player on the field just because we think it will help someone out.
Right.
So it's always just the trade-off of, I'm not sure how they get to that. They could just try and cut it loose, but I'm not so sure watching some of the reps, they aren't trying. Like, I think they are trying. Often Marzi will come off the ball and like the leverage is fine. There's some burst and juice to it, and he still just gets rocked. There's not really much you can do, right? If the leverage and technique is okay, and he just gets sourced at the line of scrimmage, it's like, well, then maybe he just doesn't have the anchor to play inside for us in the NFL. He's not a guy you're going to shuffle to the perimeter as a base down guy and then kick him inside. It's just not what he's built to be. So I just don't know how you overcome those issues. I don't think there's like if they just try and be more attack based, they start playing with more four-man fronts. I just don't think that that's going to be like a one-size-fits-all correction for them.
It's going to be interesting because if they don't fix the run defense, I don't think this is a playoff team at all whatsoever. And, you know, if it obviously continues to go like this, there's going to be a lot of defensive changes. You know, Joseph and Jordan, those are older one-year contract guys, I believe, anyways. If Mazi Smith cannot play better, you mentioned if they just get to the conclusion where they don't think that he can anchor, especially in whatever system that they want to run, is this his last year with the team? Do they try to move on from him and replace him? And is it an entirely new interior defensive line?